Applications will be dealt with in the order they appear on the agenda, and I will invite applicants, agents and public speakers who have registered to speak at the appropriate time. All speakers must ensure that they do not overrun their 3-minute time limit. There will be no questioning of the committee of objectors, supporters, applicants or agents who will not be able to speak again. All participants should mute their microphones and video feed when they are not speaking. Please remember to unmute your microphone and switch on your video feed when it is your turn to speak. Speak clearly and slowly into your microphone. The chat function on Microsoft Teams should only be used by the members of the committee and officers. This is to assist me with the conduct of the meeting. Members of the public should not use the function in any capacity, and this is being monitored and has a full audit trail. Anyone found to be using this function will be removed from the meeting. If there are registered speakers on an application, the officers will present the report. Registered speakers will be invited to make representations one at a time, and the members of the committee will be asked if they want to speak on the application. When a matter is put to a formal vote, I will ask each member of the committee individually to record their vote. Finally, I ask for everyone's patience with the use of the technology, and I apologise in advance if we experience any unforeseen difficulties, which we shall try to resolve expediently. When the item on which you have contributed is concluded, you may leave the meeting by using the red hang up button if you wish. Are there any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from Councillor D. Harley.
Thank you. And are there any substitute members to appoint for this meeting?
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Kesey serving as substitute for Councillor Harley.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest under the Members' Code of Conduct amongst the committee? None? And can I confirm and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2021 as a correct record?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. So moving on to the plans and applications to develop. The first application on the agenda this evening is P200436. Emily, can I hand this over to you, please?
Chair, it's Carl speaking. Emily, unfortunately, has got an IT problem at this precise moment. So she's trying to get back onto the system. She just called me, which is why there's been a delay. I will do my best to try and introduce this application, but I apologise that Emily obviously had a prepared presentation. If you'd like me to try and start, I will do so.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you. So this application, sorry, I'm not sure, but I haven't got a shared screen, unfortunately, for you. Sorry, I'm not sure. I haven't got the presentation on the screen. I apologise. This application is for the erection of a dwelling, one single dwelling, following demolition of an existing detached garage, which is a resubmission of a refused application in 2019. Excuse me. Yeah, that application was dismissed on an appeal in February 2020. We carried out neighbour notification to a total of 12 neighbours and have had 11 responses with a variety of objections, including loss of light, shadowing, location, some privacy, on-street parking, a number of the other issues that are in the report at page 4. Just heading down to the application. Members will see on their agenda on page 17 the site location showing number 20 and the garage site, which is the red line boundary, which is where the proposal is for. And then on page 20, I believe it is, sorry, we have the plans showing the elevation or drawings, sorry, page 18, and the block plan showing the proposed dwelling on the garage side of the building. There's further illustrations there, 3D illustrations on page 19, which give you an idea of size and scale of the development. Chair, I wonder if it's better for you to introduce the speakers, which might allow him to do the after they've spoken? I know that's unusual, but is that a better way to do this rather than me
Yeah,
do a poor
I think
job?
you're right. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank
No,
you.
that's fine. So apologies to all in the committee and in the gallery. Due to technical issues, I am going to call Councillor Phipps to speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, as we will hear, the residents in the local area around the proposed development have raised several material planning considerations, many of which were the reasons why the initial application was actually refused. Like those residents, I don't see that sufficient improvements have been made to the proposals that would make this application acceptable to residents and the committee. To mention just one point from the contribution that we're going to hear from a resident, only 0.5 metres has been reduced from the height of the proposed development compared to the original plans. Given that there is overshadowing and overlooking concerns about the proposals, that doesn't necessarily go far enough to resolve those issues. If the original decision concluded that that caused unacceptable harm to the neighbours' living conditions, then such minimal changes must surely lead to a similar conclusion being made. My own conclusion is that the amenity currently enjoyed by residents in the neighbouring property, particularly at 24 Warwell, will be significantly harmed by the proposed development. This will be a huge change for the neighbouring properties from what they've had for decades and would undoubtedly harm their quality of living. The previous decision to refuse the application was upheld by the Planning Inspectorate, justifying the position that the local authority took. Whilst it's welcome that unsuccessful applicants can refine and reapply, in this instance there's been a lot of opportunities missed to put forward a development that would be acceptable to residents as well as the local authority. During my discussions with residents, it's been noted that honest attempts to communicate with the applicant and work together have been strongly rebuked. Had those been welcomed, the applicant would know that residents would have been welcoming of a different kind of development than the one that's proposed here. Residents have also raised concerns about the character of the development, how well this will sit in with the wider streetscape. When you compare it to the rest of the street, this plot would appear to be far denser than the neighbouring properties, with a lot more built on, a lot less space. The garage site itself isn't a huge piece of land to begin with. And local residents have raised concerns with me about the design, layout and materials and how they will be out of kilter with the rest of the street and the surrounding area, creating an odd property that would cause a harm to the neighbouring properties and their occupants. There are other properties on this road that have been developed sensibly and in keeping with the area, respecting the amenities that are enjoyed by the neighbours and have done so for decades. I've no doubt that that would be possible here. However, the proposal in front of the committee tonight does not meet the stringent requirements of the council, and also it would cause the unacceptable harm to the neighbouring properties if allowed that it was refused for the first time round. So I ask the committee to consider the arguments that will be put forward by the residents next, and I would encourage committee members to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now call on Miss Harrison to speak, please?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm Kate Harrison and I live at 24 Warwell, and I'm speaking on behalf of residents who have made objections to this planning application. We have two main concerns about the proposed development, and the first is that it will overshadow 24 Warwell, where my mother and I have lived for nearly 30 years. Our house is to the north of this plot and it's lower than it because the ground slopes. So with the varying angle of the sun and the narrowness and orientation of the plot, this development will tower over the back of our house, cutting out sunlight for much of the year. And the Planning Inspectorate's appeal decision of the 12th of February 2020 with respect to the previous planning application said this was unacceptable. I quote, "Due to the orientation of the site, extent of rear projection and proximity to the site boundary, the proposed development would have a significant impact on outlook and daylight and sunlight to 24, resulting in unacceptable harm to their living conditions." Now, the The applicant will say that in the new plans, they address these issues by reducing the proposed property's height from approximately 8.5 metres to 8 metres. This is simply half a metre, and I'm sure you can appreciate that this will have minimal to no impact due to the nature of the site. What is being proposed is still a 2-storey house with a pitched roof that will overshadow ours, and I would refer you to the Dudley Borough's development strategy policy that deals with housing development and clearly says that the amenities of the occupiers of neighbouring dwellings, including harm arising from loss of privacy, outlook and sunlight, taking into account factors such as levels, orientation and the separation of development. The second concern is the impact that another development will have on parking and the flow of traffic in the street. This is a narrow road which is open to through traffic. Further, previous to this, the council has allowed the development of a cul-de-sac with 5 properties on the opposite side of the road to this plot. Also, some residents have no drives and some have more vehicles than they can fit on their drives, so there's a lot of parking on the road. Further, building in the road will only exacerbate this, causing more problems. It has been stated in correspondence that there should be a presumptions in favour of development. In the National Planning Policy Framework, the wording is sustainable development, not just development. In the Dudley Borough Development Strategy, where it explains this, it talks about securing development that improves the economic, social and environmental conditions in the area. How does this application improve those conditions for the area and for local residents? And how are the concerns of local residents being addressed in the recommendation you're making to this committee? Is it acceptable to sacrifice the amenity of long-running residents in the interest of an individual applicant? In the view of local residents, this development is unsustainable, and we ask that you follow the guidance given in the policy L1 of this document and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now call on Vicky Wilkes to speak, please?
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for seeing this proposal. I'd like to say that, yes, we did put in an application for this site previously, and that was rejected. And we looked at all the points that were raised on that rejection, and we can understand why it was. And we've worked very hard with our architect and with Catherine Golightly in order to address each and every one of the points that was raised on the rejection of the previous application. Many of the current objections received from the local residents have said that things haven't changed. We've reduced the number of bedrooms. Not only is the overall height, but actually the specific rear projection has been amended with regards to the daylight, not just the overall roof. The appearance, we've worked closely with the planning committee to address that, and my understanding is that Catherine Golightly is satisfied that all of those planning policy areas have been addressed. I'd like to say that the new smaller house, I think, is more accessible for a broader range of the local community, looking at the shortage of housing for families and people wanting to live in and around the Halesowen area. This is obviously being slightly smaller makes that more accessible. I've not had any direct approaches from anybody with regards to this planning application in the local area. But Scott, our architect, has worked closely with us and with Catherine to try and ensure that any areas of concern were addressed in the new submission, and we believe wholeheartedly that it now does meet all of the planning policy requirements. And whilst I understand that the local residents feel very emotionally about this with regards to planning policy, I genuinely believe that we have now met all of the criteria and hope that we can go ahead and build a house near a school that will be an addition.
Thank you. Emily, are you back with us?
Yes, I am, Chair. Sorry about that.
No, don't worry.
If I could just ask, it might be that we need to ask Emily some questions that if members have questions that was raised by the speakers, to ask Emily to cover those in the presentation if possible. I've let her know about the height and the concern about the appeal decision and how much it varies. So Emily, if you could address that.
Okay.
Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Chair. The application, as you all know, relates to 20 Warwell or land adjacent to. It proposes the erection of one new dwelling following the demolition of the existing detached garage on the site. The application it forms a resubmission of a previous application for one dwelling. This application was previously refused by the Planning Authority on 3 grounds, including the lack of parking, overdevelopment and residential amenity. This decision was appealed and the inspector dismissed the appeal on all grounds. The revised application has sought to reduce the size, scale and design of the dwelling. It's reduced the number of bedrooms and improved the appearance of the parking layout and reduced the impact of the development on the adjoining occupiers at 20 and 24 Warwell. The site sits on the eastern side towards the north of Warwell. The site is currently utilised by 20 Warwell as garden land and is occupied by a large flat roof garage. The road sits on gradients such that the site sits at a modestly lower level than the adjoining dwelling, 20 Warwell, and a higher level than 24 Warwell, which sits to the north of the application site. There is also a change in level between the application site and the street, which it sits at a slightly higher level. The overall design and scale of the development has been amended to ensure that that the building would not appear incongruous or out of character within the street scene, which notably properties in the area do vary in design. As the size of the dwelling has been reduced from a 4-bedroom to a 3-bedroom dwelling, the development now accords with the council's parking standards SPD. Furthermore, plans indicate that sufficient parking will be available for both the existing dwelling at 20 Warwell and the proposed dwelling as part of this application. Plans also indicate that this area will no longer be dominated by hard standing. Whilst the parking area would still appear elevated in relation to the proposed dwelling, it is notable that this is also present at the adjoining dwelling, 24 Warwell, and given the inclusion of soft landscaping is acceptable in design terms. In terms of residential amenity, the application has been amended as such to ensure that the development would be acceptable in respect of the adjoining occupiers' amenity at both 20 and 24 Warwell. Officers have also included within the recommendation to restrict permitted development rights to ensure that future occupiers of the property cannot extend without a prior application to the local planning authority. You can see here, this is the revised drawings for the proposed dwelling. The roof has been reduced slightly. You can see the change in levels across the site between 20 and 24 Warwell. The property has also sought to hip the roof backwards, which ensures that whilst it's set down from the road slightly, it no longer appears as dominant within the street scene, which was one of the reasons for refusal and was something that was noted by the inspector in the appeal decision. You can see here the overall design and scale of the dwelling, the internal footprint, whereby there is a single-storey rear element projecting out towards the rear of the property, which has been amended as such to ensure that there is no breach of the 45-degree code in respect of 24 Warwell. You can see here the existing garage on the site and the relationship with 20 Warwell and 24 Warwell. Again, here we can just see the street scene. This is an aerial view of the property. You can see the relationship of the site between 20 Warwell and 24 Warwell. And again, we can see the relationship at the rear, whereby you can see the existing single-storey rear extension serving 20 Warwell. You can see the existing rear elevation of 24 Warwell. As I've already demonstrated, there will be a slight projection from the rear of the proposed dwelling at single storey. However, that has been designed as such to reduce any impact on the adjoining occupiers. And as already stipulated, a recommendation to include a condition to remove permitted development rights, which would mean that that layout could not be altered by future occupiers through extensions without a prior application being submitted and considered to the local planning authority, where we would consider the impact on amenity, and we would also be able to consider impacts such as parking, which was highlighted, I understand, by objectors. And just to reiterate to Planning Committee, the officer recommendation is to approve the development subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. So I'll open it up to the floor. Any of the members of the committee wish to make a question, to ask a question or make a comment? Everybody's happy? Would like to go to the vote? Okay. So all those in favour of the application for approval of P200436, I am now going to go through. Councillor Bradley.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Ahmed.
Councillor Ahmed's not in attendance, Chair.
Is he not? Sorry. Councillor Burston.
I approve, Chair.
Councillor Cowell.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Hanif.
I also approve, Chair.
Councillor
Did you say me?
Well, I can do. Councillor Taylor.
I approve, Chair.
Councillor Kesey.
Approved, Chair.
Councillor Neal.
I also approve, Chair.
So the application has been approved. Thank you. So moving on to the next application on the agenda, P210038. Emily, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you relates to land adjacent to Meon Rise, Pedmore, Stourbridge, and seeks planning consent for the erection of 3 detached dwellings. The application site is located to the west of Meon Rise, a cul-de-sac located off Chorn Hill. Adjacent to the application site is a pedestrian footpath linking Meon Rise to Halfcott Avenue. The closest dwelling would be sited The closest dwelling on the application site would be sited 2 metres and 2.6 metres from this pedestrian route. Meon Rise is composed of traditionally designed modern large detached dwellings which were constructed in approximately 2006-2007, and further down Meon Rise, asymmetrical dwellings likely constructed in the 1960s-70s. Therefore, the overall design of the dwellings within the area is considered varied, and those proposed are considered acceptable, particularly in respect of the mix of design and character of properties within Meon Rise. The site includes land that was historically used as garden land for 66 and 68 Chorn Hill, which sit to the north of the application site. However, this has been severed off from the gardens historically, and now the land appears open but offers little in terms of amenity value, both visually and recreationally. Notably, both remaining gardens are approximately 22 metres in length, which exceeds the base mark 11 metres required for a garden under the Council's adopted New Housing Development SPD. This separation distance also ensures that the development exceeds the required 14-metre distance between the flank elevation of a dwelling and the windows of another. There is an existing garage situated on the site, which will be demolished as part of the development. It should also be noted that the inclusion of land that previously served 66 Chorn Hill increases the depth of the site from applications previously refused by the local planning authority in 2011 and 2012. Opposite the application site, to the east of the application site and on the opposite side of Meon Rise are 10, 22 and 24 Meon Rise. These properties are sited between 10 and 14 metres from the boundary of the application site and would maintain adequate separation distances from the proposed dwellings in accordance with the Council's new housing SPD. Furthermore, the proposed development would sit 14 and 16 metres from the rear elevations of the closest properties fronting Halfgott Avenue. Given the flank of the proposed application dwelling would not have any side-facing windows at first floor, this relationship meets the requirements of the Council's new housing SPD. Given the existing garden lengths of 66 and 68 Chorn Hill, the proposed dwellings will have an acceptable relationship with the occupiers. The garden lengths of the proposed dwellings would all meet the standards set out in the Council's new housing SPD, and subsequently the relationship to the rear garden of 64 Chorn Hill will be acceptable to ensure that there would be no unacceptable overlooking to warrant refusal in this instance. The proposed dwellings provide adequate parking that meets the standards set out in the Council's Parking Standards SPD, and the required visibility displays have been demonstrated on submitted plans. Given the size of the development, visitor parking spaces cannot be required by the local planning authority. Officers have noted objections received that have cited parking pressures within the area. However, whilst this is not disputed, given the development would provide acceptable on-site parking, the development is acceptable in highways terms. Notwithstanding this, in order to ensure that the local planning authority can manage any additional floor space to the dwellings that may increase parking pressure, the local planning authority consider it appropriate to remove the permitted development rights, and subsequently a condition removing these rights is included as part of this recommendation. The site is also subject to a tree preservation order, and the submitted tree report indicates a number of Category C and Category U trees, which provide little visual contribution to the area. The report also identifies an existing birch to the northwest corner of the site, which is proposed to be retained alongside the existing hedges along the northern boundary. The Council's tree officer is satisfied that the development will not impact this tree and that the internal layout of the dwelling is such to ensure that the siting of the dwelling will not result in future pressure. You can see here, this is a street scene view of the properties, demonstrating the separation distance between the pedestrian access to Halfgott Avenue. There will be a separation distance between each dwelling of 1.1 metres, ensuring access to the rear gardens. There will also be the adjoining dwelling to 68 and 66 Chorn Hill will be set off from the boundary by approximately 2 metres. See here, this is the overall design, and as noted, there is a very varied design within Meon Rise itself, with some traditionally designed dwellings that were most recently constructed, and some more contemporary asymmetrical designed dwellings further along Meon Rise. So officers do consider that design is acceptable within the context. You can see this is the proposed ground floor plan. First floor plan demonstrating the siting of windows, noting the flank elevations, whilst bedroom 2 would have one side window, given the proximity from the boundary and the fact that it will be conditioned to be obscure glazed for the lifetime of the development. And this bedroom has it will have a principal window that will ensure that they can have outlook for the lifetime of the development from another window. Officers consider that relationship with adjoining properties is acceptable. This is a current view of the application site from Meon Rise, and we can just see the relationship here with the pedestrian access to Halfgott Avenue. And this is looking down Meon Rise with 68 Chorn Hill just in view there towards the right of the picture. And we can just see the rear here of 68 Chorn Hill, showing that existing depth of the garden, with the garage that is proposed to be demolished just on the left-hand part of this picture. And this just indicates the boundary where the application site comes up to, denoting there the length of that existing garden. Again, here we can just see the application site towards the right with a view towards properties of Halfgott Avenue and their existing boundary treatments, and the relationship with the site in terms of their rear windows. It's just a view of the application site from Meon Rise, with 10 Meon Rise on the right. It's worth noting that that immediate flank elevation there that immediately abuts that street doesn't contain any windows on that flank elevation. This is a view up Meon Rise from Chorn Hill, and you can see the mix here of design of dwellings, with the most recently constructed ones from 2006, 2007, and then further down you can see the older properties along Meon Rise, which we can just see they're sort of in very individual asymmetrical design. This just shows you an aerial view here of the site, and as alluded to during the presentation, historic applications that were previously refused by the authority only included half of this. So the site now includes land that previously served as garden land for 66 Chorn Hill. We can just see here again the site looking towards the new dwellings and showing what their relationship will be like with this application site. And just to reiterate, the officer recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Emily. Can I call on Mrs. Crawford to speak, please?
Hello. So, as local residents affected, we'd like to draw the committee's attention to some of the primary reasons for objection amongst those raised. Dwelling C will have an overbearing impact on the Chorn Hill properties due to its elevated position, both on privacy and enjoyment of amenities, which will be detrimental to our well-being. Dwelling C will cast a massive shadow across the south-facing gardens, which will reach well into the Chorn Hill properties, thus reducing the available light not only into our gardens, but also into the spaces of our homes. In our view, this is an infringement of our human rights, especially Article 8 and the right to enjoy one's amenities and quality of living. 15 objections have been raised in total regarding on-street parking, and there are deep concerns regarding road safety and access by utility and emergency vehicles. These reasons for rejection twice before are still valid, and things are getting worse, fueled by parking pressures from the newer house builds and inadequate parking, increasing young adults at home and multi-adult rental properties. Most of the properties in Meon Rise are rentals. The frontage to the proposed development is currently used for overflow parking for Meon Rise residents, visitors, tradesmen and rail commuters. We disagree with paragraph 61 of the planning recommendation. The parked cars will not simply be displaced, they will move to a foot or lower reaches of Meon Rise, causing worse congestion than the problems already existing. As a result, the likelihood of accidents will increase and pedestrian safety will reduce. Additionally, dwelling C only has 2 metres to see pedestrians approaching. The impact of surrounding properties, trees and gardens has also not been considered. Construction work will more than likely kill and result in the felling of the trees and shrubbery and Chorn Hill, 68 Chorn Hill. And there must be assurance that the gardens will be protected if the groundwork for construction proceed. Holcroft Avenue properties fall within 22-metre window-to-window standard, and this will have an impact on the privacy of the already established properties. In conclusion, it's our collective belief that the proposed application will be an overdevelopment of this land. We vigorously object to this development and urge the committee in the strongest possible terms to reject this application on these and other grounds already raised and documented. Thank you for taking your time to hear our concerns.
Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. Can I call now on Mr. Griffiths to speak, please?
Hi there, can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
We would just like to reiterate the conclusions of the planning department in supporting the proposals submitted under this application. We also acknowledge support of the highways engineer and the tree officer regarding the proposals. Whilst there have been a number of objections to the proposals, it has been demonstrated by ourselves and the planning department that these are either not applicable as planning considerations or of insufficient concern for the application not to be recommended for approval. The properties have been designed such that appropriate car parking, garden spaces, separation distances, site density, dwelling mass and scale are all in accordance with planning policy. In addition, various conditions are proposed as part of any approval that will offer protection in terms of ecology, TPO trees, overlooking, etc., as is the norm for such applications. It has been demonstrated that the proposals accord with planning policy and will provide 3-number high-quality detached family homes with both good living spaces and external amenity areas to this established residential area of Pedmore. The properties will be located in a sustainable location with good transport links, nearby schools and local amenities, and therefore we consider the proposals very much to be sustainable development. A presumption in favour of sustainable development is at the heart of the National Planning Policy Framework. The provision of such housing on unused sites located in established suburban areas helps to alleviate the pressures for new housing to be built on green belt designated land. Thank you for your consideration of this application.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Emily, is there anything that you want to come back on before I send this out to the committee, over to the committee?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate some of the points that I made during the presentation, if that's okay with you. In terms of the relationship with the rear of 66 and 68 Shaun Hill, the garden lengths themselves are 22 metres. And the property would then be set off from the boundary by 2 metres. It's also worth noting in terms of the relationship, due to the layout of the properties, which I will just try to get back to in the presentation, they've been designed in a sort of L shape, which means that the narrowest part of those dwellings is going to be on that immediate boundary that's at the top end of 68 Shaun Hill, and that's going to be approximately 4.5 metres. So when you consider that, and then when you consider the separation distance of 22 metres, whereby our SBD policies, which consider what is an acceptable relationship between a flank elevation and a rear elevation of an existing property, is 14 metres. This will far exceed that. So whilst the properties will be visible from the rear of those properties, they will not be such that there will be a detrimental impact upon the amenity of adjoining occupiers, so far as what our policy sets out is that minimum standard. And again, as we addressed within the presentation, the development has, it does adhere to or exceed the distances that are required between all of those dwellings. In terms of the parking situation, as we've expressed in the report, there may well be parking issues within that area, and people may use that road to park on. However, by creating these accesses to the dwellings, people can no longer park on that road in that fashion adjacent to those driveways. But notwithstanding that, because the development meets our policies, so the parking standards SBD, which has been adopted by council, we would not be able to refuse it on the grounds of overspill parking, because those dwellings provide the amount of parking that they require in order to ensure that they themselves would not contribute to any parking issues within the area. Because of the size of them and the number that are provided, we can't require in our policy terms any additional parking for visitor spaces, which you may be able to request on a much larger scheme. In terms of some of the other matters that were raised, a lot of those in terms of the groundwork, that's civil. So the developer would have to ensure that they act within the party wall rights, which is something that goes beyond planning. But I think that's everything covered. Thank you, Chair.
I think my laptop froze, sorry. Committee, do any members wish to make any comments or ask any questions? No, so if we're all happy to go straight to the vote, that's planning application P210038. Councillor Bradley.
Refuse, Chair.
Under what, is there a reason as to the refusal?
Yes, Chair. I think this application is overdevelopment.
Thank you. Councillor Burston.
I approve, Chair.
Councillor Powell.
I approve, Chair.
Councillor Hanif.
I approve, Chair, subject to conditions.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I approve, Chair.
Councillor Neil.
I also approve, Chair.
And Councillor Kesey.
Approve, Chair.
So that application has been approved. So moving on to the next application of the evening, P210057. Emily, back over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my computer's being a bit slow today. The application relates to 60 Vicarage Road West in Woodsetton, Dudley. It seeks consent for a ground floor extension to the existing shop and a first floor extension to the existing flat above. The proposed rear extension would also result in the removal of an existing external staircase sited at the rear of the building. The application property sits to the east of Vicarage Road West. To the south of the application site is 61 Vicarage Road West, a two-storey semi-detached dwelling which has a modest ground floor extension. Meanwhile, to the north of the application site is 58 Vicarage Road West, a modest detached bungalow that has also been extended towards the rear at ground floor. The bungalow is angled slightly towards the application site, and there is a habitable window in the rear elevation of the single-storey extension. To the rear of the application site, 612 Carton Close, which is situated approximately 22 metres from the rear elevation of the proposed extension. The existing building is used as a shop at ground floor with residential above. The proposed additional space would provide storage for the retail unit, would provide internal access to the flat above, and the additional habitable accommodation would result in the creation of an additional bedroom. The proposed extension, although large at approximately 5 metres at ground and first floor, would not breach the 45-degree code at either adjoining property. It would also maintain a garden length of 11 metres, which would ensure no unacceptable overlooking towards the private amenity space of occupiers at Carton Close. In respect of parking, Highways have advised that the Council's adopted parking standards would require the provision of an additional off-street parking space as part of the extra bedroom created. However, the whole frontage is already block paved and associated with the ground floor commercial use, additional such that additional provision would not be feasible in this instance. Notwithstanding this, it's considered that the parking area easily accommodates 2 to 3 vehicles whilst maintaining clear pedestrian access to the shop doorway. On review, this area is primarily used by the owner for parking and not by customers to the shop, with the majority of customers walking or stopping at the curbside only for short periods of time due to the nature of the retail premise. It is therefore considered that the parking provision would not give rise to any increased impact upon highway safety, such to warrant refusal of the application in this instance. Here, this is the outline of the proposed rear extension, whereby part of this element is the two-storey rear extension will not project the full width of the property, but it will project this full depth of that hatched area. You can see here the relationship with the bungalow to the north, which has windows on that rear elevation on the single-storey extension, and this is an outline of the single-storey extension serving the property to the south, and that line where my mouse is shows the rear elevation at first floor. This is the proposed extension. You can see here it's set off from the boundary from the property to the south and would sit on the boundary of in respect of the property to the north. This is a photograph of the rear elevation, whereby this is the existing stairs that would be removed as part of the application. And this shows the existing staircase. This is a view of the rear of number 61, the property to the south. And we can see here the relationship with both properties with an aerial view. So you can see here the relationship there. And this shows you the two windows serving that single story rear extension of the property to the north. Again, this just shows you that relationship whereby number 58 is angled slightly towards the application site, but this boundary generally follows in a uniformity with the line of that existing dwelling, so that relationship doesn't continue and such that the position of that boundary line wouldn't result in any sort of unnecessary and undue overlooking towards the rear amenity space of that dwelling. See here again that relationship. And to reiterate, the officer's recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Emily. Can I call on Mrs. Hall to speak, please?
Hello there. I would like to bring to your attention Dudley MBC's guidance on what are deemed as material planning considerations, loss of light or overshadowing scale of development, impact on highway safety. I think myself and my neighbours have clearly demonstrated that all of these are going to have a negative impact on the proposed extension. We would also respectfully request that the committee refuse planning application or stress that a site visit is vital as it is overdevelopment. 60 Vicarage Road West is already a substantially sized building in close proximity to residential properties. The sheer scale of the proposal would result in an imposing eyesore for all neighbours. My own home, number 61, would suffer from loss of light inside and out as a side window in our lounge would be completely blocked and our garden too would be majorly overshadowed from the left, and it isn't a big garden to start with. The dimensions of the extension would make us feel imprisoned by a brick wall covering the whole of our patio area. 58 Vicarage Road West is residence to a family who, the gentleman who lives in this bungalow is wheelchair bound and his garden is his solace for rehabilitation. This property will also suffer huge light loss and overshadowing of something so big. The loss of light could potentially have a huge knock-on effect on this man not being able to take full advantage of his garden. 12 Carlton Close is positioned at the bottom of number 60. This residence belongs to an 86-year-old lady who has lived there for over 60 years. Due to the elevated aspect of number 60 and its already large scale, the lady is already overlooked down on. The extension would be a complete eyesore from her lounge, bringing number 60 closer to her boundary wall, mentioning also the size of the industrial fans and aerials on the building. The lady is very distraught, her privacy will be invaded. And lastly, I would also like to stress the impact of highway safety. The shop is in a small residential street. Shop parking is minimal and usually only taken up by 2 vehicles of the residents. The proposal could ultimately allow more than 2 vehicles to vacate the flat, having an impact on more cars parking on the road and a bigger convenience store, meaning more customer cars. My home gets blocked numerous times a day. It is a busy road with a bus route. Parking is a huge issue, not to mention when delivery lorries come. And respectfully, I understand that the owners will probably say that it's just an extra bedroom, but I have to think about the future and who else might go there in the future.
Time, Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Emily, are there any comments that you want to come back in on?
Thank you, Chair. I believe in the pre-committee notes that were passed to councillors earlier today, some photographs from the adjoining property were sent in. One of those pictures shows the side window that was mentioned within the speaker's comments. When we are considering the impact on a side window, we obviously have to consider whether there is any other availability of light. So if the window is, say, secondary, so there's another main window on the rear elevation that affords the greatest amenity value, that's where we will attach that weight. In terms of considering whether something will be overdevelopment of the site, we do, as part of our assessment, we do consider the 45-degree code to nearby habitable windows, which we've considered in this instance. The 45-degree code is a really good tool for us to understand how that development will sit with in terms of the internal environment. But when we are considering whether something's going to be overbearing, we do consider the external area, particularly that area immediately serving that. But the limitations of that, and so what we would expect when we are considering whether something is overbearing, is we will have to consider that as a whole, so the 45-degree code and the relationship with that external amenity space. In this instance, considering that, noting the width of the garden, the relationship of the extension in terms of that single-storey rear extension that comes out quite far. It's not considered that the extension would have such an impact that it would be arguably overbearing to the extent that we would be able to warrant refusal in that instance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Emily. Committee members, does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make? Councillor Neil.
Yes, Chair, I think a site visit would be very beneficial to all the ward members. This is my ward, so I'm very aware of this road, and I think a site visit would help lots.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. I'll put that to the vote just after I've heard some more comments. Councillor Kesey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the photographs on the pre-committee information, and as far as I can see from the plan, and hopefully I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, this proposed two-storey elevation is past the line of the single-storey elevation of the property next door. And if that is the case, that's one hell of an extension and a massive change in the outlook of the residents on either side of this property. And I'm pretty sure if I lived in one of the neighbouring houses, it would have a hugely negative effect on the quality of the enjoyment I could have of my property. So, Chair, I wonder if could you just clarify that the double-storey extension does go out further than the single-storey extension of not the bungalow but the other property, as we're looking at to the back of the property to the right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Emily, do you want to clarify that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it will. Well, the extension, because of the way that it's been designed, it's been set off the boundary at first floor when in respect of 61 Vicarage Road West. So whilst it will project further than the ground floor, the single-storey extension serving that property, it's been set off as such to ensure that the 45-degree code isn't breached in respect of both the ground floor window and the first floor window serving the rear elevation, which is set further back than the line of that single-storey extension. It will also project further than the bungalow. And that two-storey element will sort of project right up to that boundary. However, it's been demonstrated as part of the officer assessment that 45-degree code that we apply on extensions to buildings hasn't been breached. So where there is no breach, we consider that the impact upon the amenity will not be so detrimental to warrant refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Emily. Are there any more comments or questions from the committee before I put a site visit to the vote? No, so Councillor Bradley?
Yes, Chair, I'd be happy to visit. Thank you.
Councillor Burston?
I'm happy to visit, Chair.
Councillor
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Hanif?
Yeah, happy to visit, Chair.
Councillor Taylor?
With conditions, Chair, if I'm able, I will. I'm not against a visit, but I'm not promising to be there. Okay.
Yeah, I understand that, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Neal?
Yes, definitely, Chair.
And Councillor Kesey?
I'm a substitute member.
You would be able to go to the site visit and sit again on this application.
In that case, Chair, yes, I'm happy to visit the site.
Thank you. So, well, that is unanimous. So there will be a site visit on that application.
Chair, can I just come in if that's okay on that point?
Yeah.
Obviously, following on from Councillor Taylor's legitimate concerns, we haven't had a site visit requested by this committee since the pandemic. Both myself and Paul have been discussing with various colleagues a process for allowing that if it was required, which obviously now it is. I would just be mindful of the fact that we've got an unusual situation with the fact the next committee is only 16 days away. Usually we'd carry out a site visit at the next committee, as you know, but it might be difficult to achieve that given the risk assessments we'd have to carry out. I just wanted to make members aware that obviously we will look to implement your agreement, but we might have to go through some steps to make sure that members of this committee and officers and the public are reassured about the safety of that. Just a point to make. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, are there any questions from members to the chair where 2 clear days notice have been given to Mining Officer under the council procedure?
None received, Chair.
Okay, thank you. That ends the committee this evening, and I hope you all have an enjoyable evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
See you
Chair.
again.
Thank you.